He was dying. The same man who once chained me to a post and whipped me until my back looked like raw meat was now begging me for water. Colonel Marcus Whitfield, the devil himself, crawling through the Arizona sand like a broken animal. 3 days ago, I was riding toward California, finally free after 35 years of hell. The war was over, Lincoln had set us free, and I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a stolen horse beneath me. But freedom tastes different when you've got nowhere to go and no one waiting for you. That's when I saw the smoke rising from behind the red rocks, Apache smoke. My gut told me to keep riding, but curiosity killed more than just cats in this desert. I tied my horse to a mesquite bush and crept forward, expecting to find burned wagons and scattered bones. Instead, I found him. Marcus Whitfield was dragging himself across the sand, his fancy blue uniform torn to shreds, blood caked in his gray hair. The mighty colonel who used to stride across his plantation like he owned the very air we breathed was now nothing but a dying man in the middle of nowhere. He looked up at me with those same cold eyes that used to watch me get beaten, but now they were different. Desperate. Afraid. Water, he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Please. I stood there for what felt like an hour, though it was probably just seconds. This was the man who sold my wife to a traitor when she got pregnant. The man who branded his initials into my shoulder when I tried to run. The man who told me I wasn't human, just property with legs. And now he was asking me for mercy. My hand moved to the water bottle on my hip. Every fiber of my being screamed to turn around and leave him to rot under the desert sun. Justice would be watching him die the same way he'd watched so many of us suffer. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the sound of his breathing, so desperate and hollow. Maybe it was seeing him reduced to nothing. Just another dying animal in the wilderness. You know who I am? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. His eyes focused on my face and I saw the exact moment recognition hit him. The color drained from his already pale cheeks and his cracked lips started trembling. Ezra, he whispered. That's right. Ezra Thorne. The boy you bought when I was 7 years old. The man you tried to break for 28 years. He closed his eyes and let his head fall back against the sand. For a moment, I thought he'd given up, accepted his fate. But then he spoke again, and what he said changed everything. I know what you're thinking, and you'd be right to leave me here. He opened his eyes and stared straight into mine. But before you go, there's something about your wife you need to know. My blood turned to ice. Sarah had been dead for 15 years, sold away when our baby was born. What could he possibly know that would matter now? But as I looked down at this broken man, I realized he was holding one last card. And despite everything he'd done to me, I needed to know what it was. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Sarah. He was talking about Sarah, and the way he said her name made my hands shake with a rage I thought I'd buried 15 years ago. What about my wife? The words came out as a growl. Whitfield tried to push himself up on his elbows but collapsed back down. Blood was seeping through his shirt from what looked like arrow wounds in his side and shoulder. The Apache had left him for dead, but not before making him suffer. Water first, he gasped. Then I'll tell you everything. Every instinct told me this was a trap. Some final manipulation from a man who'd spent his whole life controlling people. But the mention of Sarah had opened a wound that never properly healed. I knelt down and lifted the water bottle to his lips, watching him drink like a man who'd been wandering for days. Which he probably had been. Talk, I said, pulling the bottle away after he'd had enough to wet his throat. She didn't die in childbirth like I told you. The words came out in a rush, like he was afraid I'd leave before he could finish. The baby lived too. A little girl. The desert went completely silent. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. I felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. You're lying. I sold them both to a family in Santa Fe, the Rodriguezes. They needed house help and they wanted the child too. His voice was getting stronger as the water worked through his system. Sarah's been alive this whole time, Ezra. Your daughter too. She'd be 15 now. I stood up so fast the blood rushed from my head. 15 years. 15 years of thinking they were dead, of carrying that grief like a stone in my chest. 15 years of imagining Sarah's body in some unmarked grave while our baby rotted beside her. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Because you tried to escape with her. Because you needed to be taught a lesson about what happens when my property tries to leave. He was looking me straight in the eye now. And for the first time since I'd found him, he looked like the old Marcus Whitfield. Cold. Calculating. And because the Rodriguezes paid me $500 for both of them. The rage that exploded inside me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It was pure white-hot fury that made my vision blur and my hands curl into fists. This man hadn't just stolen my freedom. He'd stolen my family and made me grieve for ghosts. I could kill him right now, wrap my hands around his throat and squeeze until those cold eyes went dark forever. No one would ever know. The desert would claim his bones. And I could ride away knowing I'd finally gotten justice. But if what he was saying was true, if Sarah was really alive somewhere in Santa Fe, you're going to tell me exactly where they are, I said, my voice deadly calm. Every detail. And then you're going to help me figure out how to find them. Whitfield actually smiled, even with blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. That's going to be difficult considering I can barely stand up. Then I guess you better get stronger real fast. I looked around at the endless expanse of desert stretching in every direction. We were at least 2 days' ride from the nearest town, maybe 3 on foot. The Apache who'd attacked his party could still be in the area, and I only had enough water for one person to make it out alive. But if there was even a chance that Sarah was out there, that my daughter was growing up somewhere without knowing her father was alive, then I'd carry this broken man across hell itself to get answers. The question was whether Marcus Whitfield would survive long enough to give them to me. I made a decision that would have seemed impossible an hour ago. I was going to save the life of the man I hated most in this world. Not out of mercy, not out of forgiveness, but because Marcus Whitfield was the only person alive who could lead me to my family. "Can you walk?" I asked, though looking at him I already knew the answer. "Not far," he admitted, trying to push himself up again. This time he managed to get into a sitting position, but I could see the effort was costing him. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the desert heat already starting to fade as evening approached. I walked back to where I'd tied my horse and grabbed my bedroll and the few supplies I had. 1 water bottle, some jerky, and a handful of hardtack biscuits. Enough for one man to reach civilization. Maybe. When I returned, Whitfield was examining his wounds. The arrow had gone clean through his shoulder, but the one in his side was still lodged deep. Dark blood had soaked through his shirt and was starting to attract flies. "That arrow needs to come out," I said. "I know." He looked up at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Fear. Real, honest fear. "But if you pull it wrong, you'll bleed to death." "I know." I knelt beside him and examined the wound. The arrowhead was buried deep, probably touching bone. One wrong move and I could nick an artery. "Lucky for you, I've had some practice with this kind of thing." It was true. 28 years of plantation life had taught me more about treating wounds than any man should know. Whip cuts, knife wounds, broken bones from accidents that weren't accidents at all. We'd learned to patch each other up because calling a doctor for slaves was considered a waste of money. "This is going to hurt," I warned him. "Just do it." I gripped the arrow shaft and felt him tense up beneath my hands. With one quick motion, I broke off the fletching end, then pushed the arrow all the way through his side until the point emerged from his back. Whitfield screamed so loud, I was sure every Apache within 10 miles heard him. But he didn't pass out, and more importantly, no major blood vessels had been cut. I tore strips from his shirt to bandage the wounds, working quickly as the sun continued to sink toward the horizon. Desert nights were brutal, especially for wounded men. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why what? Why are you helping me? After everything I did to you? Why aren't you just leaving me here to die?" I finished tying off the bandage and sat back on my heels. The question I'd been asking myself since I'd first given him water. "Because 15 years ago, you told me my wife and daughter were dead. You let me grieve for them. You let me think I was alone in this world." I stood up and looked down at him. "And now you're telling me they're alive. So until I know for sure, until I find them or confirm they're really gone, you're the most valuable thing in this desert. And after that?" I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I'd do once I found Sarah. Would I leave him in Santa Fe? Would I finally get the revenge I'd dreamed about for so many years? "We need to move," I said instead. "Apache might come back to check their work." But as I helped him to his feet, Whitfield grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "There's something else, Ezra. About why I really came out here." His eyes were intense, desperate. "I wasn't just traveling through. I was looking for you." The words stopped me cold. "Looking for me? Marcus Whitfield had been hunting me across the desert? What do you mean you were looking for me?" He leaned heavily against my shoulder as I helped him stand. His breathing labored from the effort. "When the war ended, when they freed all the slaves, I knew you'd head west. You always talked about California when you thought no one was listening. That was true. During those long nights in the slave quarters, I used to tell the others about the gold fields, about the chance to make something of yourself if you could just get far enough away from the old life. But how could he have known? I had to find you before. He stopped, his face going pale. Before what? Before you disappeared forever. There are things you need to know, Ezra. Things about your family that are bigger than just where they are now. I wanted to shake the answers out of him, but he was barely standing as it was. The sun was almost gone now, and the temperature was already starting to drop. We needed shelter, and we needed it fast. I spotted a cluster of rocks about 50 yards away that would provide some protection from the wind. It would have to do. Talk while we walk, I said, half carrying him across the sand. Your daughter, he began, breathing hard with each step. She's not just alive. She's special, smart. The Rodriguezes sent me letters over the years, updating me on their situation. You kept track of them? I had to. You see, when I sold them, I made a deal. If anything happened to me, if I died or disappeared, there was a letter to be delivered to your daughter on her 16th birthday. A letter that would tell her who her real father was and where she came from. We reached the rocks and I helped him sit down in a small alcove that would block most of the wind. My mind was racing, trying to understand what he was telling me. Why would you do that? Why would you want her to know about me? Whitfield was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening desert. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost guilty, because I made a mistake 15 years ago. A mistake that's haunted me every day since. He looked up at me, and in the fading light, I could see something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Regret. Your wife didn't just give birth to your daughter, Ezra. She saved my life. What? The night she went into labor, there was a fire in the main house. Started in the kitchen, spread fast. I was trapped upstairs, unconscious from smoke. Sarah could have run, could have escaped in all the chaos. Instead, she came into that burning house and dragged me out. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. This couldn't be true. Sarah would never have risked her life for Marcus Whitfield. You're lying. I wish I was. She pulled me out, then collapsed right there on the lawn. That's when the baby came. Right there in the dirt with the house burning behind us. His voice cracked. And the first thing she said when it was over, when she was holding your daughter, was, "Promise me you'll let her grow up free." The pain in my chest was so sharp I could barely breathe. I could picture it perfectly. Sarah, brave and selfless to the end, thinking about our child's future even in her moment of greatest vulnerability. So I promised. And then, like a coward, I broke that promise the very next day when I sold them both. If you were Ezra, what would you do? Forgive a man who saved your family but destroyed your life? Or make him pay for 15 years of lies and grief? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you'd choose. Because what happened next would test every belief Ezra had about justice and mercy. There's more, Whitfield whispered, and his next words hit me like a physical blow. Your daughter's birthday is tomorrow, which means if I die out here, she'll never get that letter. And she'll never know that her father spent 15 years thinking she was dead while she grew up believing he'd abandoned her. Tomorrow. My daughter's 16th birthday was tomorrow, and she would receive a letter that would either reunite us or destroy any chance we had of ever finding each other. The weight of that knowledge settled on my shoulders like a mountain. All these years I'd imagined her dead, buried in some forgotten grave. But she'd been growing up, learning to read and write, becoming a young woman who didn't even know her father's name. How do I know you're telling the truth? I asked, though part of me already believed him. The details were too specific, too painful to be lies. Whitfield reached into his jacket with a trembling hand and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Even in the darkness I could see it was yellowed with age. This is a copy of the letter I wrote to her. The original is with my lawyer in Santa Fe, with instructions to deliver it tomorrow if I don't return. I took the paper and unfolded it carefully. The writing was definitely Whitfield's, the same careful script I'd seen on bills of sale and punishment orders back on the plantation. But the words, "Dear Elena," I read aloud, my voice catching on my daughter's name. Elena. She had a name. Your father's name is Ezra Thorne, and he is the bravest man I ever knew. He tried to save you and your mother, and I punished him for it in ways that will stain my soul forever. If you're reading this, it means I'm dead, and you're free to find him. He's probably in California by now, still believing you died 15 years ago. Find him, child. Tell him Marcus Whitfield spent his last years trying to make amends for the worst thing he ever did. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. This broken man beside me had spent years planning a reunion he might never see. There's an address, I said, squinting at the bottom of the letter. Rodriguez family, Alameda Street, Santa Fe. Miguel Rodriguez is a good man. He's treated them well, paid Sarah wages, made sure Elena got an education. But they're not truly free, Ezra. Not while they're still bound by the contract I signed. The night was getting colder, and I could hear Whitfield's breathing becoming more labored. The wounds were taking their toll, and we were still at least 2 days from any kind of civilization. I looked up at the stars scattered across the desert sky, and felt something I hadn't experienced in 15 years. Hope. Terrifying, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, I could still be a father to my daughter. We leave at first light, I said. Can you ride if I get you on my horse? I'll have to. I pulled my bedroll around both of us, sharing what little warmth we had. The irony wasn't lost on me. 15 years ago, I would have been whipped for touching Marcus Whitfield's clothing. Now I was keeping him alive with my own body heat. Ezra, he said quietly, there's something else about Elena. Something the Rodriguezes told me in their last letter. What? She's been asking questions. About where she came from. Why she doesn't look like the rest of the family. Miguel thinks she suspects she's not really their daughter. The thought of my daughter wondering about her origins, maybe even hoping her real parents were still alive, made my heart ache. We're going to make it to Santa Fe, I said firmly. Both of us. But even as I said the words, I could feel Whitfield's fever rising, and I knew tomorrow would test every ounce of strength we both had left. Dawn came too soon, and not soon enough. I'd barely slept, listening to Whitfield's labored breathing and watching for any sign of Apache riders on the horizon. When the first light touched the desert, I knew we were in trouble. Whitfield's fever had spiked during the night, his skin was burning hot to the touch, and he was mumbling incoherently about fires and promises and a little girl with my eyes. Marcus, I shook him gently. We need to move. His eyes opened, but they were glassy and unfocused. Sarah? Is that you? My heart clenched. Even in his delirium, he was thinking about my wife, about the night she saved his life and changed everything. It's Ezra. We need to get to Santa Fe. It took everything I had to get him on his feet, and even more to boost him onto my horse. He swayed dangerously in the saddle, and I knew he wouldn't last long riding alone. I tied him to the saddle with strips torn from my shirt, then started walking, leading the horse across the endless expanse of sand and rock. The sun was already brutal, even though it was barely past sunrise. Tell me about her, I said as we walked, hoping to keep him conscious. Tell me about Elena. Smart, he mumbled. So smart it scares Miguel sometimes. She reads everything she can get her hands on, writes letters to the newspaper about women's rights and fair treatment for Mexican workers. Despite everything, I felt a surge of pride. My daughter was a fighter just like her mother. She has your stubborn streak, Whitfield continued, his voice getting weaker. Last year, she convinced Miguel to start paying the other house servants' wages instead of just providing room and board. Said no one should work for free, no matter what their situation. The irony cut deep. My daughter was fighting for the very freedom I'd been denied her entire life. By midday, the heat was becoming unbearable. My water was nearly gone and Whitfield hadn't spoken in over an hour. I could see a line of green in the distance that meant water, maybe a small stream or spring, but it was still miles away. That's when I heard the sound that made my blood freeze. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving fast. I quickly led my horse behind a cluster of rocks and pulled Whitfield down from the saddle. He was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. Stay quiet, I whispered, though I doubted he could hear me. 3 Apache warriors crested the ridge about 200 yards away. They were following our trail, and they were moving with the methodical patience of hunters who knew their prey couldn't escape. I had 2 choices. Fight 3 trained warriors with a single revolver and probably die, leaving Elena to wonder forever what happened to her father, or surrender, and hope they'd be content with taking whatever supplies we had left. But as I watched them split up to surround our position, I realized they weren't planning to take prisoners. The first warrior appeared around the left side of the rocks, his rifle already raised. I shot him before he could fire, the sound echoing across the desert like thunder. The other 2 came from different directions, forcing me to choose which one to face first. I spun toward the sound of running feet and fired twice, hitting the second warrior in the chest. but the third one was already on me. We went down hard, rolling in the sand and fighting for control of his knife. He was younger than me, stronger, and he hadn't been walking through the desert all morning. Just as the blade started moving toward my throat, a gunshot rang out. The Apache warrior jerked and fell sideways, blood spreading across his shirt. Behind him, Marcus Whitfield sat propped against a rock, smoking pistol in his shaking hand. "Couldn't let them kill you," he gasped. "Not when you're so close to finding her." The effort had cost him everything. Blood was flowing freely from his wounds again, and his face was gray as ash. "How far to Santa Fe?" he asked. I looked toward the green line on the horizon, trying to calculate distance and time against the condition of the man who held the key to my daughter's location. "Maybe 6 hours if we push hard." "I don't have 6 hours. Ezra." We both knew it was true, but as I looked at this dying man who had destroyed my life and then spent his last years trying to repair it, I made a decision that surprised us both. "Then I guess I better carry you." I fashioned a travois from the Apache weapons and what remained of my gear, dragging Marcus Whitfield across the desert like cargo. Every step was agony, every mile a testament to how badly I needed the answers only he could provide. The green line I'd seen turned out to be a small creek, barely a trickle, but enough to refill my water bottle and wet Whitfield's cracked lips. He was fading fast, his skin taking on the waxy pallor of a man slipping away from the world. "Ezra," he whispered as I knelt beside the water, "I need to tell you something else, about why I really came looking for you." I didn't want to hear any more confessions, any more revelations that would complicate the simple hatred I'd carried for 15 years. But I also couldn't afford to lose any information that might help me find Sarah and Elena. "Talk. I'm dying anyway, have been for months. Doctor in Richmond said I had maybe 6 weeks left." He coughed, and blood speckled his lips. "Cancer, eating me up from the inside." That explained why he'd risked everything to come out here alone. A dying man with nothing left to lose except the weight of his conscience. "So you decided to clear your conscience before you met your maker?" "Partly." His eyes found mine, clearer now than they'd been all day. "But mostly because Elena deserves to know her father before it's too late. And because Sarah—" He paused, struggling with words that seemed too heavy for his failing voice. "Sarah asked me to promise something else that night she saved my life." "What?" "She made me swear that if I ever found you again, I'd tell you the truth about everything. Not just about them being alive, but about why I became the man I was. About what made me so cruel." I didn't want to hear this. Understanding Marcus Whitfield, seeing him as anything other than a monster would make everything harder. "My father owned slaves," he continued, ignoring my silence. "And when I was 7 years old, one of them tried to escape with his family. My father made me watch while he had them whipped. Made me help tie the ropes, said it would teach me about property and control. The parallel hit me like a physical blow. 7 years old, the same age I'd been when Whitfield bought me. I swore I'd never be like him. But fear makes cowards of us all, Ezra. Fear of losing everything. Fear of not being strong enough. Fear of admitting you're wrong." His voice was getting weaker with each word. I became exactly what I hated most. By late afternoon, I could see the adobe buildings of Santa Fe shimmering in the distance like a mirage. My shoulders were screaming from dragging the travois. My lips were cracked and bleeding, but we were going to make it. "Alameda Street," Whitfield mumbled. "Third house from the corner, blue door." "I know. You already told me. Did I tell you about the garden? Elena planted roses. Sarah taught her." He was delirious again, lost in memories. "She writes letters to you, Ezra, every week for 5 years. Letters she never sends because she doesn't know where you are. My daughter had been writing to me. For 5 years. She'd been putting her thoughts and feelings down on paper, hoping somehow they'd reach a father she'd never known." As we crested the final hill before Santa Fe, Whitfield grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Promise me something," he gasped. "What?" "Don't let her read that letter until after you've had a chance to explain. Don't let her think you abandoned them willingly." The sun was setting as we reached the outskirts of town, painting the desert behind us the color of blood and gold. Marcus Whitfield had managed to stay alive for the entire journey, driven by sheer will and the need to see this final act of redemption through to its end. But as I turned onto Alameda Street and saw the blue door just ahead, I realized the hardest part was just beginning. I fashioned a travois from the Apache weapons and what remained of my gear, dragging Marcus Whitfield across the desert like cargo. Every step was agony, Every mile a testament to how badly I needed the answers only he could provide. The green line I'd seen turned out to be a small creek, barely a trickle, but enough to refill my water bottle and wet Whitfield's cracked lips. He was fading fast, his skin taking on the waxy pallor of a man slipping away from the world. "Ezra," he whispered as I knelt beside the water, "I need to tell you something else. About why I really came looking for you. I didn't want to hear any more confessions, any more revelations that would complicate the simple hatred I'd carried for 15 years. But I also couldn't afford to lose any information that might help me find Sarah and Elena. Talk. I'm dying anyway. Have been for months. Doctor in Richmond said I had maybe 6 weeks left." He coughed, and blood speckled his lips. "Cancer. Eating me up from the inside." That explained why he'd risked everything to come out here alone. A dying man with nothing left to lose, except the weight of his conscience. "So you decided to clear your conscience before you met your maker?" "Partly." His eyes found mine, clearer now than they'd been all day. "But mostly because Elena deserves to know her father before it's too late. And because Sarah—" He paused, struggling with words that seemed too heavy for his failing voice. "Sarah asked me to promise something else that night she saved my life." "What?" "She made me swear that if I ever found you again, I'd tell you the truth about everything. Not just about them being alive, but about why I became the man I was. About what made me so cruel." I didn't want to hear this. Understanding Marcus Whitfield, seeing him as anything other than a monster, would make everything harder. "My father owned slaves," he continued, ignoring my silence. "And when I was 7 years old, one of them tried to escape with his family. My father made me watch while he had them whipped. Made me help tie the ropes. Said it would teach me about property and control. The parallel hit me like a physical blow. 7 years old. The same age I'd been when Whitfield bought me. I swore I'd never be like him. But fear makes cowards of us all, Ezra. Fear of losing everything. Fear of not being strong enough. Fear of admitting you're wrong." His voice was getting weaker with each word. I became exactly what I hated most. By late afternoon, I could see the adobe buildings of Santa Fe shimmering in the distance like a mirage. My shoulders were screaming from dragging the travois. My lips were cracked and bleeding, but we were going to make it. "Alameda Street," Whitfield mumbled. "Third house from the corner, blue door." "I know. You already told me. Did I tell you about the garden? Elena planted roses. Sarah taught her." He was delirious again, lost in memories. "She writes letters to you, Ezra, every week for 5 years. Letters she never sends because she doesn't know where you are. My daughter had been writing to me. For 5 years. She'd been putting her thoughts and feelings down on paper, hoping somehow they'd reach a father she'd never known." As we crested the final hill before Santa Fe, Whitfield grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Promise me something," he gasped. "What?" "Don't let her read that letter until after you've had a chance to explain. Don't let her think you abandoned them willingly." The sun was setting as we reached the outskirts of town, painting the desert behind us the color of blood and gold. Marcus Whitfield had managed to stay alive for the entire journey, driven by sheer will and the need to see this final act of redemption through to its end. But as I turned onto Alameda Street and saw the blue door just ahead, I realized the hardest part was just beginning. The blue door opened before I could even knock. A middle-aged Mexican man stepped out, took one look at me dragging the travois, and immediately called for help. 2 other men appeared and helped me carry Whitfield inside. But I barely noticed them, because standing in the doorway, her hand covering her mouth in shock, was Sarah, 15 years older, lines around her eyes that spoke of hard work and worry, but unmistakably the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. She looked exactly like I'd imagined her in my dreams, except she was real, breathing, alive. "Ezra?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Hello, Sarah." We stood there staring at each other across an impossible gulf of time and pain, neither of us quite believing what we were seeing. Then footsteps on the stairs made us both turn. Elena descended slowly, and I felt my heart stop completely. She had Sarah's grace and my stubborn jaw, but her eyes were entirely her own, intelligent, curious, and currently wide with confusion as she looked between her mother and the stranger who'd just dragged a dying man to their door. "Mama, who is this man?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Elena, this is your father." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Elena's face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds. Disbelief, hope, anger, confusion, and something that might have been recognition. "My father is dead," she said quietly. You told me he died before I was born. I told you what I had to tell you to keep you safe, Sarah replied, her voice breaking. But he's been alive this whole time, thinking we were dead. From the back room came a weak voice. Ezra, come here. I found Whitfield propped up in bed. Miguel Rodriguez and another man I assumed was a doctor working over his wounds. But we all knew it was too late. He was holding on through pure willpower alone. Did you see her? He asked. I saw her. She's beautiful, isn't she? Sarah did good raising her. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and fixed me with a stare that reminded me of the old Colonel Whitfield. There's one more thing. The contract I signed when I sold them. It's not just employment. Miguel had to sign papers saying he'd never let them leave Santa Fe without my permission. What are you saying? I'm saying they're still not legally free. The Emancipation Proclamation only applied to slaves in the Confederacy, and this was a private contract in territorial New Mexico. His breathing was getting shallower. But I can fix that. Right now. He gestured weakly toward a leather satchel beside the bed. Papers are in there. All I have to do is sign them, and Sarah and Elena are completely free. Free to go to California with you if they want. I pulled out the documents and read them quickly. It was exactly as he'd said. A legal release that would void the original contract and grant them complete freedom. Why? I asked. Why are you doing this? Because 15 years ago your wife saved my life, and today you saved it again when you could have left me to die in that desert. He struggled to sit up enough to sign the papers. Maybe that doesn't balance the scales for everything I did wrong, but it's a start. As he finished signing the last document, Elena appeared in the doorway. She'd been listening to every word. Is it true? She asked, looking directly at me. Are you really my father? I nodded, not trusting my voice. And you've been alive this whole time, thinking we were dead? Yes. She studied my face for a long moment, and I could see Sarah's intelligence looking out through her eyes. I have letters, she said quietly. Letters I wrote to you every week for 5 years. Would you like to read them? Before I could answer, Marcus Whitfield spoke one last time, his voice so quiet we all had to lean in to hear him. Tell her about the roses, Ezra. Tell her how her mother used to sing to them to make them grow. He looked at Elena with something that might have been love. And tell her that the man who stole her childhood is sorry. Sorrier than words can say. Those were the last words Marcus Whitfield ever spoke. He died peacefully, surrounded by the family he'd broken apart and somehow, in the end, helped bring back together. 3 days later, we buried him in the Santa Fe cemetery. Elena insisted on placing roses from her garden on his grave, even though she barely knew him. That's when I knew she truly was Sarah's daughter. And maybe, if I was lucky, mine too. If you've been following along with this incredible journey of forgiveness and redemption, make sure to subscribe to our channel, because stories like this one need to be shared and remembered. 2 weeks after that, the three of us rode west toward California, carrying nothing but hope and 15 years' worth of letters that would help us become a family again. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since I was 7 years old, I wasn't traveling it alone. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a twist so powerful you won't forget it anytime soon. Click on the video now.